Hello there, gentle souls, wherever you find yourselves this evening. We're settling in for the story of Apollo, the golden god of light and music, whose radiance has touched every sunrise since the world began. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. There's something wonderfully comforting about knowing we're all drifting into these ancient tales together, scattered across the world but united in wonder. Before we begin, listen to the gentle crackle of the fire. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Allow the world to settle quietly around you. Picture yourself, if you will, on a hillside in ancient Greece, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly before you, stars beginning to emerge like scattered diamonds on dark velvet. In the time when gods walked openly among mortals, and the line between heaven and earth was thin as morning mist, there lived a Titaness named Leto. She was beautiful, as immortal beings tend to be, with hair that caught starlight, eyes that held the depth of evening skies, and a voice like distant music drifting across still water. Zeus, king of the heavens, ruler of thunder and storm, fell deeply in love with this gentle goddess. Their romance bloomed in secret groves, in hidden valleys, away from the watchful eyes of his jealous wife, Hera. But divine secrets, like morning mist, rarely remain concealed for long. When Hera discovered the affair, her rage was not the quick flash of lightning, but the slow, inexorable power of an earthquake. The queen of the gods decreed that no land, no island, no piece of earth anywhere in creation should give shelter to Leto when her time came to give birth. And so Leto wandered, heavy with divine twins, her steps growing slower, her burden growing greater. She walked coastlines where waves crashed, bringing no comfort, climbed hills that offered no rest, approached cities whose gates closed, unwelcoming at her coming. For months, she traveled the wine-dark sea, rejected by every shore, turned away from every harbor. Then, in the depths of her despair, Leto came upon Delos, a small island that floated freely in the Aegean, never anchored, never still. It was a place of shifting sands and restless tides, too small for grand cities, too wild for careful cultivation. The island trembled when Leto approached, its rocky shores shifting nervously in the waves. Delos knew who she was, understood the implications of offering sanctuary to Zeus's beloved. To shelter her would mean defying Hera's will, risking the queen's eternal wrath. But Leto was past pride now, past everything except desperate need. She knelt on the shifting shore, her hands pressed to her swollen belly, where the twins stirred restlessly, as if they too sensed the urgency of their situation. Her plea to the island was simple, heartfelt, born of a mother's love that knows no boundaries. She promised that her son would build there the most magnificent temple the world had ever seen, that Delos would become sacred beyond measure. The island considered, its beaches shifting like thoughts taking shape. The promise was magnificent, but so was the risk. Yet there was something in Leto's presence, a quality of such pure maternal love, that moved even stone to compassion. And so Delos accepted. Leto's labor began with the setting sun, as if the twins she carried were already responding to the rhythms of day and night. For 9 days and 9 nights she labored, her cries echoing across the empty sea, carried by winds that seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. On the dawn of the 10th day, as golden light began to spill across the horizon, Artemis was born. She emerged like moonlight made flesh, silver-haired and silent, her eyes already holding the mystery of wild places and untamed spaces. The baby goddess did not cry as mortal children do. Instead, she opened her ancient eyes and seemed to nod, as if approving of the arrangements, already understanding her place in the great cosmic order. Artemis, even as a newborn, possessed an otherworldly grace. She looked upon the world with eyes that had seen the hunt before she had ever held a bow, that knew the songs of wolves before she had ever walked beneath the moon. But Artemis, for all her perfection, was only the beginning. Leto's labor continued, and the island of Delos began to glow with an inner light, as if preparing for something even more magnificent. The seas calmed to mirror stillness, the winds fell silent, and every creature on earth seemed to pause, sensing that the world was about to change forever. Then, as the sun reached its zenith, Apollo was born. The moment Apollo drew his first breath, Delos erupted in light so brilliant that sailors hundreds of miles away stopped mid-journey, certain they were witnessing the birth of a second sun. Golden radiance poured from the newborn god like liquid sunshine, warm and pure and impossibly beautiful. The very air shimmered with his presence, and flowers bloomed instantly across the previously barren island, their petals catching and reflecting his divine glow. Palm trees sprouted from rock, springs of sweet water burst forth, and the entire island transformed into a garden worthy of the gods. Apollo did not cry. Instead, his first act was to speak, his infant voice carrying the perfect pitch of a master musician, the clear cadence of a born poet. His words rang across the water like temple bells, declaring his intention to reveal divine will through lyre and bow. The nymphs who attended Leto gasped in wonder and fear. Most divine children, even those destined for greatness, required years to develop their powers, decades to find their voices. But Apollo arrived fully conscious of his purpose, already reaching toward the destiny that would define his eternal work. Themis, goddess of divine order, appeared with the traditional offerings of nectar and ambrosia, the food of immortals. But Apollo's request was different, unprecedented. He asked for a lyre and a silver bow, the tools through which he would channel divine purpose into mortal understanding. And so it was that, on his first day of existence, Apollo was given his sacred instruments. The lyre came first, fashioned from gold and ivory that sang with the music of the spheres. When his tiny fingers touched the strings, music unlike anything heard before filled the air, harmonies that spoke directly to the soul, melodies that seemed to contain all the beauty and sorrow and hope in the world. The silver bow followed, gleaming like captured moonlight, never to miss its mark, never to fail in its purpose. When Apollo's hand closed around it, the weapon hummed with power, as if recognizing its master. Even as a newborn, Apollo understood the weight of these gifts. The lyre would bring healing, joy, and divine inspiration to mortals. The bow would bring justice, swift and sure, to those who defied the cosmic order. True to Leto's promise, Apollo looked upon Delos with eyes that saw not what was, but what could be. The small, rocky island would indeed become sacred beyond measure, but not yet. First, there were other matters to attend to, ancient wrongs to right, cosmic justice to be served. For even as Apollo played his first songs, and Artemis learned to walk in the sacred groves that had sprung up around her birth, there was a shadow across their joy. Python, the great serpent that had once terrorized their mother at Hera's command, still lived. The ancient dragon coiled in the caves near Delphi, its presence a wound in the world, a reminder of suffering unpunished, of justice delayed. Python was old, older than the gods themselves, born from the mud and chaos of the world's first days. Its scales were black as midnight, each one the size of a warrior's shield, and its eyes burned with the cold fire of primordial hatred. Apollo was only days old when he set down his lyre and took up his bow. His infant features were serene, beautiful beyond description, but his golden eyes held the steady fire of divine justice. He looked toward the mainland, toward the distant peaks where Python waited, unknowing. The dragon had thought itself safe, protected by its ancient power, secure in its mountain stronghold. But justice, true justice, recognizes no sanctuary except righteousness itself. Apollo's resolve was clear, his purpose unwavering. There was work to be done, ancient debts to be paid, cosmic balance to be restored. And here, as the golden light of Delos dims to the gentle glow of evening, as the waves lap softly against the sacred shore, we pause in our tale. Somewhere across the wine-dark sea, an ancient evil stirs in its mountain lair, unaware that divine justice approaches on feet that have walked the earth for mere days. Apollo rests now in his island cradle, the silver bow beside him gleaming in starlight, the golden lyre humming softly with melodies yet to be born. But do not mistake this peaceful scene for an ending. It is, rather, the calm before a storm that will reshape the very landscape of justice itself. Sleep now, gentle listeners, and let your dreams be filled with golden light and silver music. The god of prophecy and healing watches over the night, and his story, like the dawn, waits patiently for its time to unfold. The Valley of Delphi, when Apollo first laid eyes upon it, was a place where beauty had gone to die. Where once fertile fields had stretched toward the mountains, now only barren earth remained, poisoned by Python's presence for countless centuries. The river that flowed through the valley ran black and thick, and the very stones seemed to weep with accumulated despair. Local shepherds and farmers had long since fled, leaving behind empty villages and abandoned temples. Only the dead remained, their bones scattered across the landscape like discarded prayers, a testament to Python's endless, inexorable hunger. Yet as Apollo walked through this wasteland, something remarkable began to happen. His golden light pushed back the shadows. His presence brought warmth to the cold and lifeless air. With each step, small miracles occurred. Green shoots pushed up through the corrupted soil, the poisoned river began to clear, and somewhere in the distance, a single bird, tentative but hopeful, began to sing. Python was not merely a monster, though monstrous it certainly was. It was something far more dangerous, far more significant. The great serpent represented the old chaos, the primordial disorder that had ruled the world before the gods brought structure and meaning to existence. When Leto had wandered the earth, seeking sanctuary for her unborn children, it was Python who had pursued her most relentlessly. Not out of simple malice, though malice it possessed in abundance, but because it sensed, with the cunning of ancient evil, that these children would bring change. Order. Light. Everything that Python's chaotic nature despised. The dragon's lair was a maze of caverns that burrowed deep into the heart of Mount Parnassus, passages that had never known sunlight, chambers where the very air was thick with the exhalations of something that should never have been allowed to draw breath. Here Python coiled, massive beyond comprehension, its scales scraping against stone with sounds like grinding millstones. But even in its mountain fastness, the serpent felt the approach of something new. Something that did not smell of prey or fear or the familiar despair of mortals who had lost their way. This presence carried the scent of justice, clean and sharp as mountain air, and it filled Python with a rage that had been building for centuries. Apollo's journey from Delos to Delphi was like sunrise itself, though perhaps it would be more accurate to say that sunrise learned its grace from watching the young god move across the wine-dark sea. His golden sandals touched the waves and they turned to crystal beneath his feet, as if the very water recognized divinity and sought to honor it. Fish leaped from the depths to catch a glimpse of the god, birds wheeled overhead singing hymns in languages older than human speech, and the dolphins, those wisest of sea creatures, swam alongside his path as far as the shallow waters would allow. As Apollo approached the mainland, the very landscape seemed to respond to his presence. Flowers bloomed in his footsteps, springs bubbled up from previously dry ground, and the air itself grew sweet with the promise of something wonderful about to unfold. But as the young god drew closer to Delphi, the atmosphere began to change. The light grew dim, though the sun shone brightly overhead. The flowers that had bloomed so eagerly in his wake began to wilt. The springs ran red with an unexplained discoloration, and a foul wind carried the stench of decay down from the mountain slopes. Python knew he was coming. The ancient dragon could sense the approach of divine justice like a storm front moving across the sky, and its rage shook the very foundations of the mountain. Picture, if you will, Apollo standing at the entrance to that cursed valley, his youthful form radiant against the backdrop of devastation. He was no longer the infant who had spoken his first words just days before, for divine growth follows divine time, and the god had already assumed the form of a youth of surpassing beauty. His hair caught the morning light like spun gold, his eyes held the steady warmth of summer sunshine, and his presence radiated power that made the very air shimmer around him. Yet there was nothing cruel in his aspect, nothing vindictive. He carried himself with the calm certainty of one who brings not destruction, but restoration. The silver bow hung at his shoulder, its string humming softly with anticipation. At his side, the golden lyre waited, silent for now but ready to sing victory songs when justice was done. Apollo understood, with the clarity that comes only to the truly righteous, that this confrontation was about more than personal vengeance. It was about the fundamental order of things. The young god walked through Python's wasteland, and with each step, life began to return. It was not that he imposed his will upon the land, but rather that the earth itself, freed momentarily from the dragon's oppressive presence, remembered what it had been before the corruption took hold. When Apollo reached the mouth of Python's cave, he did not call out challenges or hurl insults into the darkness. Such theatrics were unnecessary, beneath the dignity of true justice. Instead, he simply stood, radiant and patient, and let his presence announce his purpose. From the depths of the mountain came a sound like an earthquake learning to roar. Python was stirring, uncoiling its massive length, preparing to face this unexpected intruder. The ground trembled, loose stones clattered down the mountainside, and from the cave mouth emerged a stench so foul that it seemed to give the very air a poisonous weight. Then Python appeared, and the morning sun seemed to dim in the presence of such concentrated malevolence. The dragon's head alone was larger than most mortals' homes. Its eyes burned with the cold fire of stars dying in the void, and when it opened its mouth, revealing fangs like twisted spears, the sound that emerged was less roar than avalanche. Yet Apollo did not flinch, did not step back, did not show the slightest sign of fear or doubt. He simply drew his silver bow, knocked a golden arrow that blazed like a small sun, and prepared to write the ending to a story that had been centuries in the telling. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense, for battles imply some measure of equality between the combatants. This was rather an expression of cosmic principle, the inevitable triumph of order over chaos, of justice over ancient wrong. Python struck first, lunging forward with impossible speed for something so massive, its jaws opening wide enough to swallow temples. Its breath was poison that could kill at a touch, its movement carved new valleys in the mountainside, and its roar shattered windows in villages that lay beyond the horizon. But Apollo was faster than thought, graceful as music itself, and his first arrow found its mark with the precision of divine purpose. The golden shaft pierced Python's eye, and the dragon's scream of rage and pain was heard in every corner of Greece, causing mothers to pull their children closer and wise men to pause in their scrolls, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the world. The battle that followed was like a force of nature unleashed in the valley. Python's massive tail swept across the landscape, leveling hills, redirecting rivers, turning the very geography of the region into a weapon. But Apollo danced between the attacks, his golden sandals carrying him through the air itself, his bow singing with each arrow released. Each golden arrow that found its mark blazed with divine fire, carrying not just the power to wound but the power to purify, burning away the corruption that had gathered around Python through countless centuries of evil deeds. As the battle raged, something beautiful began to happen. With each of Apollo's arrows, the valley began to heal. The poisoned river ran clear and sweet, flowers bloomed in the dragon's footprints, and the very air grew clean and fresh, as if the world itself was exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Python, ancient and powerful as it was, had never faced an opponent like this. Apollo fought not just with divine strength but with divine purpose, each arrow guided not by hatred but by love. Love for the innocent, love for the natural order, love for justice itself. The end came suddenly. Python, weakened by countless wounds, made one last desperate charge, seeking to drag its destroyer down into death. But Apollo stood his ground, drew his bow with perfect calm, and released a single arrow that blazed brighter than the sun itself. The arrow struck Python in the heart, and the ancient dragon fell with a crash that echoed across all of Greece, its massive body finally still, its reign of terror ended at last. As its life ebbed away, Python's massive form began to steam and dissolve, its corruption finally purged by the cleansing fire of divine justice. Where Python fell, Apollo knelt and placed his hands upon the earth. Immediately, sweet springs bubbled up from the ground, and the air filled with the scent of laurel and wild honey. This place, where ancient evil had dwelt, would now become the most sacred site in all of Greece. The young god understood, with wisdom beyond his apparent years, that the true victory lay not in the slaying but in what would grow from this cleansed ground. He spoke words of consecration over the valley, declaring that here he would build his temple. Here he would speak through chosen priestesses, revealing to mortals the will of Zeus. But Apollo's work was not yet finished. Even as the last echoes of Python's death cry faded from the mountains, the young god knew that cosmic law demanded balance. The taking of any life, even one so corrupt as Python's, carried consequences that must be acknowledged and accepted. And so it was that Apollo, having won his first great victory, prepared to face his first great trial. For justice, true justice, applies even to the gods themselves. Let us pause here, as the sun sets over the newly cleansed valley of Delphi, as the springs sing their quiet songs and the first brave flowers push through soil that remembers what it was like to nurture rather than poison. Apollo stands victorious but thoughtful, understanding that even righteous action carries a weight that must be borne. The great serpent Python is no more, its ancient evil purged from the world. But the young god who accomplished this deed knows that the cosmic order demands payment for such actions, no matter how necessary, no matter how just. Rest now, gentle listeners, and let your dreams be filled with golden arrows flying true, with ancient wrongs finally set right, with justice shining like sunlight across a world made clean. Apollo's greatest challenge lies ahead, but for tonight, it is enough to know that the darkness has been driven back, and the light endures. The fates, those ancient sisters who weave destiny itself, do not often involve themselves directly in the affairs of gods. Their work is done through thread and pattern, through the subtle manipulation of chance and choice that mortals call fortune. But when Apollo stood over Python's corpse, bow still gleaming in his hands, they appeared to him as surely as sunrise follows darkness. They materialized from the mountain mist, their forms shifting like smoke, their voices harmonizing in ways that made reality itself pause to listen. To look upon them directly was to understand that time itself was merely another thread in their cosmic tapestry, and that even gods must answer to the patterns they weave. Their message was simple, inevitable, and not unkind. Apollo had slain what was ancient before Zeus drew breath, and while justice had been served, balance must be maintained. The young god would serve penance for his deed, not as punishment but as education, learning the lessons that only service can teach. 8 years. 8 mortal years he must serve as a shepherd to King Admetus in distant Thessaly, learning humility, patience, and the value of mortal life that burns so briefly but burns so bright. Apollo accepted his sentence with the grace of one who understands that wisdom often comes disguised as hardship. He could have raged, could have called upon his father Zeus for intervention, could have refused the fate's decree. But the young god possessed something rarer than power or beauty. He possessed wisdom enough to know when he needed to learn. The road to Thessaly wound through valleys that had never known the touch of divine feet. Apollo walked slowly, his golden sandals making no sound on the dusty earth, and for the first time in his brief but glorious existence, the god of light felt the weight of solitude settle upon his shoulders like a cloak woven from twilight. Yet as he walked, the landscape around him seemed to respond to his presence with the gentle joy of recognition. Flowers bloomed in his footsteps, not the dramatic transformation that had marked his earlier journey, but something quieter, more subdued. Birds sang sweeter songs when he passed, and the very air grew warm and pleasant, as if the world itself sought to comfort this young god in his time of exile. King Admetus ruled from a modest palace in the fertile valleys of Thessaly, a realm known more for its peaceful prosperity than its martial glory. He was a good king, just and fair, beloved by his people for his wisdom and his gentle heart. But like all mortals, he was bound by the limitations of human sight, seeing only what his eyes could perceive. When Apollo appeared at his gates, the king saw only a young man of extraordinary beauty-seeking work. There was something about the stranger, something that spoke of nobility held in check, of power temporarily veiled, but Admetus, being wise, asked no questions that might embarrass a visitor who clearly valued privacy. The god's request was simple. He wished to serve as a shepherd, to tend the royal flocks and learn the quiet rhythms of pastoral life. His references, if you'll forgive the gentle irony, were somewhat vague. He had worked with sheep before, he explained, and possessed a certain gift for keeping dangerous animals at bay. Admetus, looking upon this remarkable youth and feeling something stir in his heart that he could not quite name, agreed without hesitation. There was a quality about the stranger that suggested depths beyond measuring, currents that ran too deep for casual sounding. Apollo approached his humble duties with the same perfection he brought to all things, but here, for the first time, that perfection was tempered by something new, restraint. He could have made the sheep sing in harmony, could have commanded the wolves to dance attendance upon the flocks, could have turned the very grass into ambrosia. Instead, he chose to work within mortal limitations, to find excellence through patience rather than power. Under his care, the royal flocks thrived beyond all expectations, but in ways that seemed natural rather than miraculous. Sheep that had been weak and sickly grew strong and healthy. Ewes gave birth to twins and triplets, their lambs born perfect and beautiful. No wolf dared approach the fields where Apollo watched, yet no supernatural terror kept them at bay. They simply chose, with the wisdom that wild things sometimes possess, to hunt elsewhere. The very grass seemed greener where his sheep grazed, the streams ran clearer and sweeter, and the wool that grew on his charges became so fine that merchants traveled from across the Mediterranean just to bid on it. Yet these changes occurred so gradually, so naturally, that even the most observant would attribute them to good fortune rather than divine intervention. But it was not merely his skill with animals that made Apollo such an exceptional shepherd. He was discovering, for the first time in his existence, the quiet satisfaction that comes from caring for helpless creatures, the gentle joy of watching life flourish under patient guidance. In the evenings, as the sun set over the peaceful hills and the sheep settled for the night, Apollo would sit among his flock and play the simple lyre he had fashioned from mountain wood and sheep gut. The music that flowed from those humble strings was unlike anything he had created in his divine glory, unlike the cosmic harmonies he had played on Delos. This was something new, something born from long days of simple labor and quiet contemplation. It spoke not of cosmic grandeur or perfect harmony, but of mortal joys and sorrows, of the small miracles that occur when one truly pays attention to the world around them. The music had power, but it was a different kind of power than he had known before. Sick animals recovered after listening to his melodies, not through divine intervention, but through the profound peace that settled over them. Exhausted shepherds found their strength renewed, not by magic, but by the way the music seemed to remind them of everything beautiful they had ever loved. Word of the shepherd boy's gift began to spread throughout the kingdom. Merchants began timing their journeys to pass through Admetus's lands, hoping to hear the youth play. Nobles made pilgrimages disguised as common travelers, drawn by rumors of music that could heal the spirit as surely as it delighted the ear. In his exile, Apollo discovered powers he had never known he possessed. Not the grand, cosmic abilities he had inherited from his divine birth, but smaller, gentler gifts born from his growing understanding of mortal life and all its fragile beauty. He could ease the loneliness of a widow with a song that spoke of love transcending death. He could calm the fears of children with stories that turned darkness into adventure and monsters into friends. He could bring hope to the desperate simply by listening, with divine patience, to their troubles and offering the kind of understanding that comes only from one who has himself known loss. These were not the mighty deeds that inspire epic poetry. There would be no temples built to commemorate them, no festivals held in their honor. But they were, Apollo began to realize, perhaps the most important work he had ever done. For 8 years, the god of light learned to tend not just sheep but souls. He learned that healing is not always dramatic and swift, but sometimes slow and gentle, like sunlight warming cold earth. He learned that music is most powerful not when it shakes the foundations of heaven, but when it comforts a single troubled heart. In the 7th year of his exile, Apollo encountered something that would haunt him for all eternity: mortal love in all its vulnerable beauty. Her name was Caronis, a physician's daughter who had come to trade in Admetus's kingdom, and she possessed a spirit as wild and free as the mountain streams she resembled. Apollo met her by chance, or perhaps by fate, at a crossroads where their paths happened to converge. She was sitting beside a well, her dark hair unbound, singing a melody that made his divine heart remember what it felt like to be surprised by beauty. When she looked up and saw him, Apollo felt something he had never experienced before: the sweet vulnerability of uncertain love. Not the overwhelming passion that comes with divine power, but the gentle, tentative hope that asks rather than demands, that offers rather than takes. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was conducted in stolen moments and shared silences. Apollo would appear at the well when his duties permitted, and they would talk of small things and large ones, of healing arts and the patterns that connect all living things. But Caronis was mortal, and mortality brings with it the weight of time and the fear of loss. She could not wait forever for a shepherd who spoke in riddles of divine purpose and whose eyes held depths that seemed to span centuries. When Apollo's exile drew near its end, she married another, a young merchant from her father's city. Apollo felt the betrayal like a sword through his divine heart, and in his pain he called upon his sister Artemis to strike down the woman who had proven faithless. But as Coronis lay dying from the goddess's arrow, Apollo saw the child she carried beneath her heart. His child, born of their brief but deep love. With gentle hands that shook with grief and regret, Apollo drew the unborn babe from his mother's womb. The child lived and would grow to become Asclepius, the god of healing, born from love and tragedy combined. When the 8th year of his exile ended, Apollo stood once more in the court of King Admetus, but now he appeared in his true form, golden and radiant, terrible in his beauty. The king fell to his knees, understanding at last who his humble shepherd had truly been. The god's words to Admetus were gentle, filled with genuine gratitude for the kindness shown to a wandering exile. He blessed the king's realm with lasting prosperity, promised that his kingdom would know peace, and swore that when Admetus's time came to journey to Hades, that passage would be delayed as long as divine influence could manage. As Apollo prepared to return to his divine duties, he took one last look at the fields where he had learned so much about life and love and loss. The sheep he had tended grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. The flowers he had encouraged bloomed bright along the pathways, and somewhere in a distant city, his son Asclepius was growing strong, carrying within him the seeds of healing that would one day bless all mankind. The god of light had learned to tend small things with great love, and perhaps that was the most divine lesson of all. As the stars emerge over the peaceful hills of Thessaly, as the shepherd fires burn low and the flocks settle into slumber, we watch Apollo take his final steps away from the mortal realm that had taught him so much. He carries with him no treasure save wisdom, no glory save understanding, no power save the knowledge of what it means to serve with love. The golden god has learned that true strength lies not in the ability to command but in the willingness to care, not in the power to dazzle but in the gift of bringing peace to troubled hearts. His exile ends, but the lessons learned in these quiet fields will inform every dawn he brings to the world. Sleep now, gentle souls, and let your dreams be filled with pastoral melodies and the gentle wisdom that comes from tending the things we love with patient, careful hands. Apollo returns to his divine throne tomorrow, but he carries within him the shepherd's heart, and that changes everything. The road back to Delphi stretched before Apollo like a ribbon of gold in the morning light, each step carrying him closer to the fulfillment of an ancient promise. 8 years had passed since he had left this place, a young god drunk on victory and the righteousness of justice served. Now he returned, tempered by exile, softened by sorrow, and deepened by the hard-won wisdom that comes only from truly understanding the weight of love and loss. The valley had waited for him, as sacred places sometimes do. Where once Python's corruption had poisoned the earth, now wildflowers swayed in gentle breezes and crystal streams sang their way down from the mountains. But this was not merely natural healing. The land itself seemed to have been holding its breath, preparing for the return of its promised god. As Apollo walked through the transformed valley, he felt something calling to him from the very earth, something ancient and sacred that spoke of destinies yet to unfold. It was time to fulfill the vow he had made in his youth, time to build the temple and establish the oracle that would speak divine will to all humanity. At the spot where Python had breathed its last, a wonder had occurred in Apollo's absence. From a fissure in the rock, sweet vapors rose, carrying within them the gift of prophecy. These were not the poisonous exhalations of the ancient serpent, but something pure and divine, born from the earth's own gratitude for its deliverance. Apollo knelt beside the sacred spring and breathed deeply of the prophetic mist. Immediately, visions flooded his divine consciousness like a river breaking through ancient dams. He saw the future spreading before him like a vast tapestry, woven from the threads of mortal choice and divine will, stretching forward through centuries yet to come. He saw kings and common folk, pilgrims from distant lands, all coming to this place seeking guidance for their troubled lives. He saw priestesses speaking in riddles that held profound truth, and mortals struggling to understand the wisdom hidden in ambiguity like pearls within shells. But most clearly, he saw his own destiny unfolding like a scroll written in starlight. This place would become the center of the world, the navel of the earth where heaven and earth touched, and divine wisdom flowed like water to thirsty souls. With his divine vision clear before him, Apollo began the sacred work of construction. But he did not build with the usual tools of mortal craft. Instead, he sang his temple into existence, his voice rising in ancient harmonies that were older than language itself, deeper than music as mortals understand it. As he sang, the very stones began to move, drawn by melodies that spoke directly to their mineral hearts. Marble blocks flew through the air like birds returning to their nests, settling perfectly into place with the precision of cosmic mathematics. Columns rose like growing trees, their proportions so perfect they seemed to echo the mathematical music of the spheres themselves. The temple that emerged from Apollo's song was unlike anything ever built by mortal hands or divine will. Its columns caught the light and held it like captured sunbeams. Its walls seemed to breathe with inner life, and its proportions spoke of harmony so perfect that merely looking upon it brought peace to troubled minds. The structure was both impossibly beautiful and strangely intimate, grand enough to house a god yet welcoming enough to comfort the humblest petitioner. Every line spoke of balance, every curve sang of harmony, and the whole edifice seemed less like a building than like frozen music, Apollo's own divine nature expressed in stone and space. Within the sacred walls, Apollo created a chamber where the prophetic vapors rose most strongly. Here he would place his chosen priestess, the Pythia, who would breathe the sacred mist and speak his words to waiting mortals. But finding the right person for such a role required careful consideration. The first to serve as Pythia was a young woman named Aristoclea, daughter of a local farmer who had shown unusual sensitivity to divine presence. When Apollo appeared to her in a dream, she did not flee in terror but knelt in humble acceptance of her sacred calling. Her concerns were those of any mortal offered such honor. She was not learned in the ways of kings or the mysteries of statecraft, not versed in the complex riddles that would be expected of one who spoke for a god. But Apollo understood that what he required was not learning but honesty, not cleverness but clarity of heart. The wisdom she would speak would come not from her but through her, flowing like water through a clear vessel that neither distorts nor diminishes what it carries. She need only open her heart to divine truth and let it flow, as natural as breathing, as inevitable as dawn following darkness. And so Aristoclea became the first Pythia, the first to breathe the sacred vapors and speak in the voice of the god. When the prophetic mist filled her lungs, her eyes grew distant and her voice took on harmonics that mortal throats should not possess, carrying within them echoes of cosmic wisdom. Through the Pythia's lips, Apollo spoke, but always in riddles and symbols that required deep thought to understand. This was not obscurity for its own sake, nor divine arrogance delighting in confusion. Rather, it reflected Apollo's understanding that divine wisdom is not meant to remove the burden of choice from mortal shoulders, but to illuminate the paths available and let each soul choose its own destiny. The prophecies that flowed from the sacred chamber were like maps drawn in mist, showing the shape of the land ahead without dictating which road must be taken. They revealed consequences without commanding choices, offered insight without imposing answers. A king might ask whether he should go to war, and receive the reply that if he crossed a certain river, a great empire would fall. The words were always true, but truth, Apollo had learned, is often larger and more complex than mortal understanding can easily grasp. which empire would fall, which river held significance. These details were left for the questioner to discover through action and reflection. Above the entrance to his temple, Apollo inscribed 3 simple phrases that would guide all who sought his wisdom. The first, and most famous, read simply, "Know thyself." This was not a command to narcissistic self-absorption, but a deeper call to honest self-examination. How can one make wise choices without understanding one's own nature? How can one find true happiness without knowing what truly brings joy to one's own heart? The oracle's wisdom was useless to those who did not first understand themselves well enough to ask the right questions. The second maxim read, "Nothing in excess." Apollo had learned, through his own sometimes painful experience, that even good things carried too far become destructive. Love taken to extremes becomes obsession. Justice without mercy becomes cruelty. Even virtue pursued without balance can lead to pride and spiritual blindness. The third inscription was the most mysterious. Surety brings ruin. Those who came to the oracle seeking absolute certainty for their future would be disappointed, for Apollo's prophecies always left room for human choice and divine mystery. The future was not fixed but fluid, shaped by decisions yet to be made and wisdom yet to be gained. From the sacred spring, Apollo called forth a laurel tree whose leaves would be forever green and whose branches would never break. This tree became the symbol of his oracle, and its leaves became the crown of those who excelled in poetry and athletic contests. The laurel was also a reminder of his lost love, Daphne, who had chosen transformation over surrender to his pursuit. In honoring the laurel tree, Apollo honored not just prophecy but the right of every soul to choose its own path, even when that choice brought sorrow to those who loved them. Pilgrims who came to consult the oracle would carry away small branches of the sacred laurel as tokens of divine blessing and reminders that truth, once glimpsed, should be carried into daily life like a light to guide uncertain steps through the complexities of mortal existence. As word of the oracle's power spread throughout the Mediterranean world, Delphi became a place of pilgrimage unlike any other. Kings and beggars, philosophers and farmers, all made the difficult journey to the valley where the gods spoke truth through mortal lips. Apollo established rituals to ensure that all who came seeking wisdom were treated with equal respect. Rich and poor alike must purify themselves in the sacred spring, must offer what they could afford rather than what they thought might buy favor, and must wait their turn to approach the Pythia regardless of their earthly status. The god had learned from his years of exile that divine power is best expressed not in overwhelming displays of cosmic might, but in gentle service to those who seek truth and healing for their troubled souls. The democracy of divine guidance, one might call it, where wisdom was available to all who approached with sincere hearts. The oracle's first great prophecy came when Croesus, king of Lydia and perhaps the richest man in the known world, arrived at Delphi with a question that would echo through the ages. His inquiry was simple. If he made war upon the Persians, what would be the outcome? The Pythia breathed deeply of the sacred vapors, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of divine knowledge. If Croesus crossed the river and made war, a great empire would be destroyed. The king departed well pleased, certain that the prophecy foretold his victory over the Persian Empire. But Apollo's wisdom worked in ways that mortal minds could barely grasp, revealing truth while respecting the freedom that makes choice meaningful. When Croesus attacked the Persians, it was indeed a great empire that fell. His own. Thus began the oracle's reputation for prophecies that were always true but rarely in the way that mortal questioners expected. Divine truth, it seemed, had its own mysterious logic that required wisdom to understand and humility to accept. And so Delphi became not just the center of the world in a geographical sense, but the heart of human spiritual seeking. Here, gods and mortals met in sacred dialogue, and divine wisdom flowed like honey from the golden lips of prophecy. The temple that Apollo had sung into existence stood gleaming in the mountain light, its oracle ready to speak truths that would shape the course of human history for countless generations to come. Pilgrims came and went like seasons, each carrying away some fragment of divine understanding to light their way through the labyrinth of mortal life. As evening settles over the sacred valley, as the last supplicants make their way down the mountain paths and the Pythia extinguishes the sacred flame until dawn brings new seekers, we pause in wonder at what the young god has accomplished. From the ashes of ancient evil, he has built something beautiful and eternal, a bridge between the divine and mortal realms. Sleep peacefully now, and let your dreams be filled with ancient wisdom and sacred mysteries that speak always of truth hidden in the depths of the human heart, waiting patiently to be discovered by those brave enough to look within themselves for answers. As the centuries flowed past like golden honey through immortal fingers, Apollo found himself at the height of his divine powers. The oracle at Delphi spoke his wisdom to countless pilgrims. His healing touch had saved thousands of mortal lives, and his music had inspired the greatest poets and artists of the ancient world. Yet for all his accomplishments, something stirred in his immortal heart that neither nectar nor ambrosia could satisfy. It was in this mood of restless contemplation that Apollo encountered the most gifted musician ever born to mortal flesh. His name was Orpheus, and when he played his simple lyre, stones themselves seemed to listen, leaning forward as if eager to catch every note that fell from his mortal fingers. Orpheus came to Apollo's temple not seeking prophecy but instruction. A young man perhaps 20 summers old with dark hair that caught the light like raven's wings and eyes that held the deep sadness of one who sees too much beauty in the world and knows how easily it can be lost. The young musician's request was humble, born of genuine reverence rather than false modesty. He had heard Apollo's divine music in dreams, he explained, and knew that compared to such celestial harmonies, his own songs were like the chirping of crickets beside the roar of ocean waves. Apollo looked upon this earnest youth and felt something stir in his divine heart. Not romantic love, as he had felt for Daphne or Caronis, but something deeper and rarer. Recognition. Here was a soul that understood music not merely as entertainment but as the fundamental language of existence, the song that holds the universe together in harmonic balance. The god's response was gentle, acknowledging the young man's humility while suggesting that he might underestimate his own gifts. The invitation was simple: play, and let divine judgment determine what flows from mortal fingers touched by inspiration. Orpheus took up his lyre, carved from simple mountain wood and strung with common gut, humble materials that belied the magic they contained. But when he began to play, the very air seemed to lean in to listen. Birds fell silent, wind stilled, and even the stones of the temple seemed to shift slightly closer, drawn by melodies that spoke directly to the soul. Apollo listened with growing wonder and something that might have been envy, if gods were capable of such emotions. This mortal's music was not perfect, as divine music is perfect. It was flawed, mortal, touched by the brevity of human life and the knowledge of inevitable loss. But in that very imperfection lay its power, for Orpheus sang of longing in a way that immortal beings could never truly understand. For 7 years, Apollo taught Orpheus the secrets of divine music, but not the grand cosmic harmonies that moved the spheres through space. Instead, he shared the subtle, gentle songs that heal wounded hearts and bring peace to troubled minds, the music that speaks to mortals in their own language of hope and sorrow. Music, Apollo explained as they sat by the sacred spring, is not about the notes themselves but about the silence between them. It is not the sound that matters but the space that sound creates for the soul to breathe, to remember what it has forgotten, to hope for what it has not yet dared to dream. Orpheus learned quickly, his mortal mind sharp and eager, his heart open to divine instruction. But more than that, he taught Apollo in return, showing the god how mortals experience music not as a cosmic principle, but as a living thing that grows and changes with each performance, each listening, each heart that opens to receive it. When Orpheus played, he explained during one of their evening conversations, he felt as though his heart was speaking directly to the hearts of his listeners. Music became a bridge between souls, a way of sharing what could not be spoken in words, of touching places in the spirit that language could never reach. Apollo nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his divine consciousness. Music was not just about perfection but about connection, not just about beauty but about the sharing of that beauty with others who needed its healing touch. In the 7th year of his training, Orpheus fell in love with a wood nymph named Eurydice. She was beautiful in the way that wild things are beautiful, graceful as a deer, shy as a woodland stream, and when she laughed, even Apollo felt his immortal heart lift with joy at the sound. The young couple seemed perfectly matched in every way that mattered. Orpheus's music and Eurydice's dance. The young couple seemed perfectly matched in every way that mattered. Orpheus's music and Eurydice's dance combined to create performances of such transcendent beauty that even the gods paused in their eternal occupations to watch and wonder. Their love was the kind that poets dream of capturing in verse, pure and genuine and unmarked by the shadows that so often darken mortal hearts. Apollo blessed their union, and for a time it seemed that mortal love might achieve what divine perfection could not. A happiness so pure, so complete, that it cast no shadows and left no bitter aftertaste in memory's mouth. But fate, that cruel weaver of destinies, had different patterns in mind for the young lovers. On their wedding day, as Eurydice ran laughing through a meadow bright with spring flowers, her joy as radiant as sunshine on water, she stepped upon a viper hidden in the grass. The serpent's fangs found their mark with the precision of destiny, and within moments the poison coursed through her mortal veins like liquid sorrow. Orpheus reached her just as the light was fading from her eyes, gathering her in his arms like a broken song that could never be sung again. He sang every healing melody Apollo had ever taught him, sang with such desperate love that flowers bloomed around them in the shape of his grief and the very stones wept tears of liquid crystal. But mortal music, however beautiful, however perfectly performed, cannot restore mortal life once it has fled. Eurydice died in her husband's arms, her last words a whisper of love that broke Orpheus's heart into pieces too small to ever mend completely. Apollo watched this tragedy unfold from his sacred grove, and for the first time in his divine existence felt truly helpless. His power could create beauty, could inspire justice, could heal many forms of suffering. But it could not undo death, could not restore what the fates had cut away with their inexorable shears. Mad with grief, Orpheus determined to do what no mortal had ever attempted. He would descend to the underworld and plead with Hades himself for the return of his beloved. Apollo tried to dissuade him, knowing the dangers of such a journey and the slim hope of success. The realm of the dead, the god explained gently, belongs to his uncle Hades, and those who enter rarely return unchanged, if they return at all. The underworld is not meant for the living, and its laws are not swayed by mortal pain, however deep. But Orpheus would not be deterred. If seeing Eurydice again required him to change, to become something other than what he was, then he would pay that price gladly. Love, he declared, was worth any sacrifice, any transformation, any risk. Apollo watched his beloved student disappear into the entrance to the underworld, and felt his divine heart breaking with a pain he had thought only mortals could experience. For he knew with prophetic certainty that whatever returned from that dark realm would not be the bright young man who had brought such joy to his immortal days. When Orpheus returned from his journey to the land of the dead, he was indeed changed beyond recognition. Hades had agreed to restore Eurydice on one condition. Orpheus must lead her out of the realm of death without looking back until they both stood in sunlight again. But love had made him weak, and doubt had made him foolish. At the very threshold of the world above, with sunlight falling on his face like a blessing, Orpheus turned to look upon his beloved. She vanished like morning mist, returning forever to the shadowy halls of death, and no amount of pleading or music could call her back again. The young man who returned to Apollo's temple was hollow-eyed and broken, his spirit shattered by a loss that went beyond death into the realm of dreams betrayed and hope murdered by its own eagerness. His music now carried the sound of ultimate sorrow, of love that transcends even death but cannot overcome the weakness of the human heart. For years, Orpheus wandered the earth, playing songs so sad, so beautiful, that all who heard them were moved to tears. Even the gods wept at his melodies, for they spoke of a pain so pure, so absolute, that it became its own form of terrible beauty. But mortal hearts, however large, are not meant to carry such sorrow indefinitely. One day, Orpheus came to Apollo and laid down his lyre at the god's feet with the finality of someone making a last offering. His words were barely above a whisper, filled with the exhaustion of one who has carried grief too long. Every note reminded him of what he had lost. Every melody echoed with her laughter. Every song became a fresh wound in a heart that could not heal. Apollo looked upon his student, his friend, the mortal who had taught him so much about the true nature of music and love, and felt the full weight of divine sorrow. With gentle hands, the god took up the abandoned lyre and began to play. The music that flowed from those divine fingers was unlike anything he had ever created before. It spoke not of cosmic grandeur or perfect harmony, but of mortal sorrow transformed by love into something beautiful beyond all description. It acknowledged pain without denying hope, honored loss without surrendering to despair. As Apollo played, Orpheus closed his eyes and smiled for the first time since his return from the underworld. In the god's music, he heard not just his own grief but the grief of all lovers who have lost their beloved, and in that shared sorrow he found, at last, a kind of peace. When the song ended, Orpheus had gone to join Eurydice in whatever realm awaits those who love more deeply than life itself, leaving behind only the echo of his music and the memory of what it means to love without reservation. Apollo sat for a long time holding Orpheus's simple lyre, understanding finally what his mortal student had tried to teach him. Music was not about the musician but about those who listened. It was not about perfection but about truth, and truth included sorrow as well as joy, endings as well as beginnings. From that day forward, Apollo's music carried within it the echo of mortal experience. It spoke not just of divine beauty but of human longing, not just of cosmic order but of the beautiful chaos of love and loss that makes mortals who they are. When pilgrims came to Delphi seeking wisdom, Apollo's oracle spoke not just of fate and destiny, but of the importance of cherishing beauty while it lasts, of loving deeply and completely, even knowing that all mortal things must pass away like flowers in autumn. The god of music had learned the most important lesson of all, that perfect notes played by immortal hands can move the stars in their courses, but imperfect songs sung by mortal hearts can move the gods themselves to tears. And so we come to the end of our tale, as the last notes of Orpheus's lyre fade into the gentle darkness of evening. The sun still rises each morning, carried across the sky by Apollo's golden chariot, bringing light to a world that perpetually needs both literal and metaphorical dawn. The oracle at Delphi still speaks wisdom to those who seek truth, though the words are gentler now, tempered by understanding of how fragile and precious mortal life truly is. Somewhere in the music of the spheres, the echo of a simple lyre plays on, reminding all who listen that love, though it may end in sorrow, is still the most beautiful song ever written. Apollo continues his ancient work, bringing illumination to a world that needs both light and shadow, both certainty and mystery, both the perfection of divine will and the beautiful imperfection of mortal choice. He has learned to serve rather than rule, to inspire rather than overwhelm, to find his immortality not in worship but in the eternal human drive to create something beautiful from the chaos of existence. Rest now, gentle souls, and let your dreams be filled with music that speaks of love transcending even death, of beauty that remains forever in the hearts of those who have truly listened, of light that returns each morning to remind us that darkness, however deep, is never the end of the story. The Golden God watches over your sleep, and in his music, all stories find their proper ending. Not in farewell, but in the promise that dawn will come again, carrying with it new songs, new hopes, and new reasons to believe in the enduring power of beauty. Story to this point is complete. Sweet dreams to you all.